The champagne flute trembled in my hand as Aunt Lucille's words cut through the reception's joyful noise like a blade through silk. "That woman at your wedding," she whispered, her weathered fingers gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "She's been watching you for months." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I followed her gaze across the candlelit ballroom of the historic Bellmont Manor, past the swaying couples on the dance floor, beyond the tables adorned with white roses and baby's breath. There, partially hidden behind a marble pillar, stood a woman I'd never seen before. She was perhaps 40, with auburn hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and wearing a navy dress that spoke of understated wealth. Her pale green eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my newly married skin crawl. When our gazes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she raised her own champagne glass in what might have been a toast, or a challenge. "Who is she?" I managed to ask, though my throat felt suddenly dry. Aunt Lucille's grip tightened. "I don't know, dear. But I've seen her before. Outside your apartment building. At the coffee shop where you meet your friends. Even at the grocery store where you shop." The reception continued around us in a blur of laughter and music, but I felt as though I was sinking into quicksand. My wedding day, what should have been the happiest day of my life, was being poisoned by the presence of this stranger who had apparently been cataloging my every move. Maya. My new husband Connor appeared at my elbow, his face flushed with happiness and perhaps a bit too much whiskey. "Your cousin Danny wants to know if we're doing the dollar dance." I told him. He stopped mid-sentence, noticing my expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I glanced back toward the pillar, but the woman was gone. Vanished as if she'd never been there at all. "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like putting on a mask. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Connor's concerned expression melted into understanding. "Of course it has. Want me to get rid of some of these people? We could sneak up to the bridal suite early." The bridal suite. Our wedding night. The beginning of our new life together. How could I explain that everything felt tainted now by the knowledge that a stranger had been watching me, studying me, for God knew how long? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "In a bit," I said, accepting the kiss he pressed to my temple. "Let me just mingle a little more." As Connor moved away to rejoin his groomsmen, I grabbed Aunt Lucille's arm. "Tell me everything. When did you first notice her?" My aunt glanced around nervously, as if the mysterious woman might reappear at any moment. "It was about 3 months ago. I was visiting you, remember? We went to that little bistro on 5th Street for lunch. She was there, sitting alone, but she kept looking over at our table. I thought it was odd, but what? I saw her again. The next week when I picked you up for the doctor's appointment. She was across the street, pretending to window shop, but her eyes were on your building. And then last month, when we went dress shopping for today." Lucille shuddered. "She was in the boutique, Maya. Pretending to browse, but I swear she was listening to every word we said about your dress, the venue, everything." My mind raced backward through the past few months, trying to remember if I'd noticed anything unusual. Had there been someone following me? Watching me? The thought made my skin crawl. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I demanded. "I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. You were so happy with the wedding planning, with Connor. I didn't want to worry you over what might have been nothing." Tears gathered in my aunt's eyes. "But seeing her here tonight, at your wedding. Maya, she wasn't invited. Security should have kept her out." I scanned the room again, searching for any sign of the mysterious woman. The ballroom was filled with familiar faces, family, friends, Connor's colleagues from the law firm. Everyone had been accounted for on our guest list. Everyone except her. "I need to find her," I said, starting to move toward where I'd last seen the woman. "Maya, no." Lucille caught my arm. "If she's been watching you for months, if she somehow got into a private event, this isn't someone you want to confront alone." But I was already walking away, driven by a need to understand what was happening. The woman's face was burned into my memory, those pale green eyes, the way she'd looked at me with such familiarity. As if she knew secrets about me that I didn't even know myself. I pushed through the crowd, smiling and nodding at well-wishers, accepting congratulations and compliments on my dress, all while my heart hammered against my ribs. The ballroom's ornate details, the crystal chandeliers, the gilt-framed mirrors, the fresh flower arrangements, all seemed suddenly sinister, as if they were hiding secrets in their shadows. Near the bar, I spotted Mrs. Patterson, Connor's elderly neighbor who had a reputation for noticing everything that happened in their upscale neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson, I approached with my brightest smile. "Thank you so much for coming tonight." "Oh, my dear, it was lovely. Simply lovely." She patted my hand with her gloved fingers. "Though I must say, I was surprised to see Eleanor here. I didn't realize you two knew each other." My blood turned to ice. "Eleanor?" "Eleanor Blackwood. She was standing right over there by the pillar not 10 minutes ago. Lovely woman, though she's had such a difficult time since the accident." "What accident?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "Well, dear, surely you know about her daughter. It was in all the papers. Such a tragedy, Maya." Connor's voice interrupted as he appeared beside us with 2 of his groomsmen in tow. "Pictures. The photographer wants to get some shots of us. With the wedding party before people start leaving." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Mrs. Patterson and demand she tell me everything about Eleanor Blackwood and her daughter and whatever accident she was referring to. Instead, I found myself being swept away toward the photographer, my questions unanswered and my anxiety climbing higher with each passing moment. The next hour passed in a blur of posed smiles and forced laughter. Through it all, I searched the crowd for any sign of Eleanor Blackwood, but she had vanished as completely as if she'd been a figment of my imagination. It wasn't until we were finally alone in the bridal suite, Connor loosening his tie and humming our wedding song under his breath, that I found the envelope. It was cream-colored and expensive, with my name written across the front in elegant script. Someone had slipped it under our door while we were downstairs at the reception. "What's that?" Connor asked, noticing me holding the envelope with trembling hands. I'm not sure." I broke the wax seal, an old-fashioned touch that somehow made everything more ominous, and pulled out a single sheet of matching stationery. The message was brief, written in the same elegant handwriting. "Maya, congratulations on your wedding. You looked beautiful today, just as Sarah would have at her age. I hope we can talk soon. There are things you need to know about your past, things your adoptive parents never told you. I'll be in touch. Eleanor P.S. Check your birth certificate carefully. The name you're looking for is Sarah Catherine Blackwood." The letter fluttered from my numb fingers to the plush carpet. Connor was beside me in an instant, his face creased with concern. "Maya? What is it? What does it say?" I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The world was tilting on its axis, and everything I thought I knew about myself was crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Sarah Catherine Blackwood. I had been adopted when I was 3 years old by Linda and Robert Chen, who had given me a loving home and never made me feel like anything other than their daughter. They'd told me my birth parents had died in a car accident, that there were no other relatives, that I was alone in the world until they found me. But if Eleanor Blackwood was telling the truth, Maya. Connor's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" I looked up at him, this man I'd just married, this man I thought I knew everything about, this man who was supposed to be my future, and realized I didn't even know who I was anymore. "Connor," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I think I need to call my parents." But even as I said it, I wondered if the people I'd called parents my entire life had been lying to me for 25 years. And if they had been lying about my adoption, what else had they been hiding? The woman in the navy dress, Eleanor Blackwood, had been watching me for months. Now I was beginning to understand that she hadn't been watching a stranger. She'd been watching her daughter. The phone rang 4 times before my mother's sleepy voice answered. It was nearly midnight, and Connor and I were supposed to be celebrating our first night as husband and wife. Instead, I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, still in my wedding dress, clutching Eleanor's letter with white knuckles. "Maya? Honey, what's wrong? Did something happen at the reception?" "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. There was a pause. In the background, I could hear my father stirring, asking what was happening. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Was my birth name Sarah Catherine Blackwood?" The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched on so long that I began to wonder if the call had dropped. Finally, my mother's voice came back, but it was different now, strained and careful. Maya, where did you hear that name? That was all the confirmation I needed. My world, which had already been tilting since Eleanor's appearance at the wedding, now completely inverted. So it's true. It wasn't a question. Honey, your father and we can explain. Can you come over? This isn't something to discuss over the phone. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. I'm on my honeymoon, Mom. Or I'm supposed to be. Instead, I'm finding out that my entire life has been built on lies. Connor, who had been sitting silently beside me, put a gentle hand on my shoulder. I could see the confusion and concern in his eyes, but I couldn't deal with that right now. My entire sense of identity was crumbling. Maya, please don't say that. We love you. We've always loved you. Everything we did was to protect you. Protect me from what? From whom? From Eleanor Blackwood. Another pause. Longer this time. You've seen her. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. She was at my wedding, Mom. My wedding. She's been watching me for months, and apparently she's my. I couldn't finish the sentence. She's not your mother, Maya. I am. I've been your mother since you were 3 years old. Linda Chen is the only mother you've ever really known. But, even as she said it, I could hear the fear in her voice. The terror that after 22 years, their secret was finally catching up with them. What happened to me when I was 3? What really happened? My father's voice came on the line. They must have put me on speaker. Maya, sweetie, this is complicated. There are legal issues involved, confidentiality agreements we signed. Legal issues? My voice rose. What kind of legal issues? The kind that kept you safe, my mother said firmly. The kind that gave you a normal, happy childhood instead of. She trailed off. Instead of what? Maya, my father's voice was gentle but firm. We need to see you in person. There are documents you need to see, things we need to explain properly. Can you and Connor come over tomorrow? I looked at Connor, who nodded immediately despite his obvious confusion. Fine. But I want everything. Every document, every detail, every reason you had for lying to me my entire life. After I hung up, Connor and I sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. Maya, whatever this is about, we'll figure it out together. I turned to look at him, this man I'd just married, who was supposed to know me better than anyone, and who was now discovering that even I didn't know who I really was. Connor, what if I'm not who you think you married? He took my hands in his. You're Maya Chen. You're my wife. You're the woman I fell in love with. Whatever your name was before, whatever happened when you were 3 years old, that doesn't change who you are now. But I wasn't so sure. As I finally changed out of my wedding dress, hanging it carefully in the closet like a costume from a play I was no longer performing in, I wondered if anything about my life was real. That night, I dreamed of a little girl with auburn hair running through a garden, calling for someone who never answered. The next morning, Connor and I drove to my parents' house in uncomfortable silence. I'd barely slept, and my mind was churning with questions I'd never thought to ask. How had I ended up with the Chens? Why had Eleanor given me up? And why, after all these years, was she watching me now? My parents' suburban home looked exactly the same as always, white colonial with blue shutters, carefully maintained garden, American flag hanging from the front porch. But knowing what I now knew, even this familiar sight felt foreign. Mom answered the door before we could knock. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Maya. She reached for me, but I stepped back. I couldn't handle being comforted by her right now, not when I wasn't even sure who she really was to me. Where's Dad? In the study. We have everything laid out for you. The study had always been Dad's domain, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, and the smell of old paper and leather-bound volumes. Today, the desk was covered with manila folders, official-looking documents, and what appeared to be newspaper clippings. Dad stood as we entered, his face grave. Maya. Connor. Please, sit down. I remained standing. I want to know everything. Start from the beginning. My parents exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happens without words. Finally, Dad picked up a folder. Your birth name was Sarah Catherine Blackwood. You were born on March 15, 1998, to Eleanor and David Blackwood. He handed me a birth certificate. There it was, in black and white, Sarah Catherine Blackwood, born to Eleanor Rose Blackwood and David Michael Blackwood. Eleanor is a very wealthy woman, Mom continued. Old money. Her family owns Blackwood Industries. They're involved in everything from real estate to technology to pharmaceuticals. I knew that name. Blackwood Industries was a Fortune 500 company. Their logo was on buildings throughout the city. David was Eleanor's second husband, Dad continued. Her first husband, Eleanor's college sweetheart, died in a boating accident when she was in her 20s. She remarried David when she was 35, and you were born 2 years later. What happened to David? To my birth father? Another exchanged look. Maya, Mom said gently, David Blackwood was not a good man. He had problems, gambling, drinking, and worse. Much worse. Dad opened another folder, revealing police reports and court documents. David became abusive. Toward Eleanor, and eventually toward you. When you were 2.5, Eleanor finally found the courage to leave him. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Connor moved to stand behind me, his hands on my shoulders. She filed for divorce and sought full custody, Dad continued. But David fought her. He had good lawyers, and he threatened to drag the proceedings out for years. Meanwhile, his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and dangerous. What kind of dangerous? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Mom pulled out a newspaper clipping. The headline read, Blackwood Industries heiress seeks protection from estranged husband. He was stalking Eleanor, threatening her, threatening you. The police couldn't do much. He was careful, and he had resources. Eleanor was terrified. So what happened? David had an accident, Dad said quietly. A car accident on a rainy night. He'd been drinking. He wrapped his car around a tree on the mountain highway. I stared at them. He died. Yes. And Eleanor? She had a breakdown. Complete psychological collapse. She'd been living in fear for so long, and when David died, instead of feeling relief, she felt responsible. She blamed herself for his death, convinced herself that she'd somehow caused it. That's when we came into the picture, Mom said softly. We were working with a private adoption agency that specialized in unusual circumstances. Eleanor's lawyers contacted the agency. She felt she couldn't be a proper mother to you in her condition, and she was terrified that somehow David's family would try to get custody. His family? The Blackwoods are a complicated family, Dad explained. David's parents had disowned him years earlier because of his problems, but they still had legal standing as grandparents. Eleanor was convinced they would try to take you away from her if they knew she was struggling mentally. I was trying to process all of this information, but it felt like trying to hold water in my hands. Everything kept slipping away. So she gave me up. She arranged for you to be placed with a loving family, Mom corrected. Us. But it wasn't a typical adoption, Maya. Eleanor never terminated her parental rights. Legally, she's still your mother. The room spun around me. What? The arrangement was temporary, Dad explained. Eleanor was supposed to get help, recover from her breakdown, and then resume custody. But months turned into years, and she never came back for you. Until now, Connor said quietly. Yes, Mom said. Until now. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the suburban street looked peaceful and normal, kids riding bikes, neighbors mowing lawns, the mailman making his rounds. But inside this house, my entire understanding of reality was being rewritten. Why now? I asked. Why is she watching me now? We don't know, Dad admitted. We haven't heard from Eleanor or her lawyers in over 20 years. The arrangement was that she could have supervised visits, but she never asked for any. We sent photos and updates through the lawyers for the first few years, but then even that stopped. What kind of updates? School pictures, report cards, Christmas photos. We wanted her to know you were happy and healthy. I thought about Eleanor. At the wedding, the way she'd looked at me with such familiarity. She'd been watching my life from a distance for decades. There's more, Mom said hesitantly. More? She pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the others. Eleanor set up a trust fund for you. A substantial one. We've never touched it. We've never even told you about it because we hoped you'd never need to know about any of this. How substantial. As of your last birthday, it's worth approximately $47 million. The room went silent except for the ticking of Dad's antique clock. $47 million. More money than I could even comprehend. I looked around the room, at my adoptive parents who had raised me with love and sacrifice, at my new husband who had married Maya Chen and was now discovering he'd actually married an heiress, at this elegant stranger who claimed to be my dying mother. I need time to think, I said finally. Time is the one thing I can't give you, Eleanor replied. The lawyers need to finalize the inheritance paperwork. The board of directors needs to meet you before I die. There are security protocols to establish, financial advisors to meet with, 100 different people who need to understand that Sarah Blackwood is real and prepared to take control of her legacy. What if I don't want it? Eleanor's composure finally cracked. For just a moment, I saw vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of a dying woman who had spent 22 years hoping for a chance to know her daughter. Then you reject it, and it all goes to my sister Victoria, she said quietly. Who will dismantle everything I've built, fire half the employees, and turn Blackwood Industries into just another soulless corporation focused solely on profit. You have a sister? Another relative I'd never known existed. Victoria Blackwood Hartley. She's been waiting for me to die for 30 years so she can get her hands on the company. She's ruthless, amoral, and everything wrong with old money families. Eleanor's voice hardened. If you walk away from your inheritance, you're not just rejecting money, Sarah. You're condemning 50,000 people to unemployment and giving Victoria the power to hurt thousands more. I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about money or family drama, it was about the lives and livelihoods of tens of thousands of people I'd never met. What exactly are you asking me to do? Come with me. Meet the lawyers, the board members, the key executives. Learn about the company and what it means. Spend your remaining time with me getting to know who you really are. Eleanor paused. And help me plan how to transition power so that when I die, you're ready to protect everything I've built. And if I say no? Then I'll respect your decision. But I'll also die knowing that I failed you twice, once when I let my fear and guilt keep me from raising you, and again when I couldn't convince you to claim your birthright. The manipulation was subtle but effective. Eleanor Blackwood might be dying, but she was still a master at getting what she wanted. How long? I asked. How long what? How long would I need to stay with you? To learn everything you think I need to know? Eleanor's eyes brightened with hope. 2 months. Maybe 3. Long enough to understand the company, meet the key players, and establish yourself as my successor. I can't just disappear for 3 months, I protested. I have a job, responsibilities, you have a trust fund worth $47 million, Eleanor reminded me. Your employer will understand if you need to take an extended leave of absence to deal with a family emergency. What about Connor? I looked at my husband, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Connor is welcome to join us, of course. The penthouse has plenty of room, and I'm sure we can find ways to keep him occupied. Connor spoke for the first time in several minutes. Maya, Sarah, whatever your name is, this is your decision. But I think you need to understand what you're really being offered here. What do you mean? She's not just offering you money. She's offering you the chance to know where you came from, to understand your real family history, and to have a relationship with your birth mother before she dies. Connor's voice was gentle but firm. You've spent your whole life wondering about your biological parents. Now you have the chance to get answers. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Your husband is a wise man, Sarah. And, Connor continued, if this Victoria person is as bad as Eleanor says, and if walking away really would hurt thousands of people, don't you have an obligation to at least try to prevent that? I looked at each of them, Eleanor with her hopeful expression, Connor with his supportive concern, my adoptive parents with their fearful worry. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. I need to talk to Connor alone, I said finally. Eleanor nodded and stood gracefully. Of course. I'll wait outside. After she left, the 4 of us sat in heavy silence. Finally, Dad spoke. Maya, whatever you decide, we'll support you. You're our daughter, and that will never change. But I could hear the unspoken caveat in his voice. But I'm scared, Mom admitted. Eleanor Blackwood is a powerful, manipulative woman who's been watching you for months. She shows up at your wedding, drops a bombshell about your identity, and now wants you to leave everything behind to join her world. It feels like emotional blackmail. It is emotional blackmail, Connor said bluntly. But that doesn't mean she's wrong about everything else. I turned to look at him. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe this is an opportunity. You've always wanted to make a difference in the world, to help people on a larger scale. This could be your chance. Or it could be a trap. Maybe. But, Maya, he caught himself. Sarah. Whatever your name is, you're one of the strongest, smartest people I know. If anyone can handle Eleanor Blackwood and whatever game she's playing, it's you. I walked to the window, looking out at the same suburban street that had looked so foreign to me just 24 hours ago. Everything was different now. I was different now. If I do this, I said slowly, if I go with her and learn about this company and this family, what happens to us? To our marriage? Connor joined me at the window. We figure it out as we go. Maybe I come with you. Maybe I stay here and we make long-distance work for a few months. Maybe we discover that Maya Chen and Connor Walsh aren't who we're supposed to be anymore. The honesty in his voice both comforted and terrified me. Are you saying you want me to go? I'm saying I want you to have all the information before you make a decision that will affect the rest of your life. He took my hand. But whatever you decide, I'm with you. Even if that means learning to be married to a billionaire instead of a social worker. I almost smiled at that. Almost, outside, I could see Eleanor sitting in an elegant black sedan, waiting patiently for my answer. She'd waited 22 years to reclaim her daughter. A few more minutes wouldn't kill her, but according to her doctors, a few more months might. I turned back to face my family, all of them, biological and adopted, husband and parents, and made my decision. I need to make a phone call, I said, reaching for my purse. I need to request a leave of absence from work. The relief in Eleanor's eyes when I walked outside and got into her car was almost overwhelming. But as we drove away from the only home I'd ever known, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making either the best decision of my life or the worst mistake I'd ever made. Only time would tell which one it turned out to be. The Blackwood Industries headquarters rose 73 floors into the Manhattan sky like a gleaming monument to corporate power. As Eleanor's sedan pulled up to the private entrance, I felt my stomach clench with a mixture of anticipation and dread. 2 weeks had passed since I'd made the decision to leave my ordinary life behind, and I still wasn't sure if I was walking toward my destiny or my destruction. The board is expecting us at 10, Eleanor said, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. She looked friendlier than she had at my parents' house, the weight loss from her chemotherapy becoming more apparent despite her perfectly tailored Armani suit. They're curious about you. Curious or hostile? Eleanor's laugh was dry. In corporate circles, there's rarely a difference. The private elevator whisked us to the executive floor in silence. I'd spent the past 2 weeks in Eleanor's penthouse, poring over financial documents and corporate histories, trying to absorb 22 years of Blackwood legacy in a crash course that left my head spinning. Connor had returned to Connecticut to handle his own work obligations and to give me space to process everything, but I missed his steady presence more than I'd expected. The boardroom was exactly what I'd imagined, mahogany table that could seat 20, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, portraits of deceased Blackwood patriarchs glowering down from the walls. 11 people were seated around the table, their faces carefully neutral as Eleanor and I entered. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor announced, taking her seat at the head of the table, I'd like you to meet Sarah Catherine Blackwood. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel their eyes analyzing me, cataloging every detail of my appearance, my posture, my confidence level. These people controlled billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. They were not impressed by potential. Sarah, Eleanor continued, these are the members of Blackwood Industries' board of directors. She went around the table with introductions, but the names and titles blurred together in my mind. Financial director, operations manager, technology chief, legal counsel, a constellation of corporate power that I was supposedly destined to join. The only name that stuck was Victoria Blackwood Hartley. Eleanor's sister sat directly across from me, and the family resemblance was unmistakable, the same auburn hair, though hers was streaked with silver, the same bone structure, the same pale green eyes. But where Eleanor's gaze held warmth despite her manipulative nature, Victoria's eyes were cold as winter. "So," Victoria said, her voice carrying a hint of British accent that spoke of expensive boarding schools and old money pretensions, "this is the long-lost daughter. Tell me, dear, what qualifications do you have to inherit control of a $3 billion corporation?" The question was clearly designed to humiliate me, but I'd expected it. "Currently? None," I replied honestly. "But I have 8 months to learn, and I'm a quick study." 8 months, Victoria repeated with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Optimistic, aren't we?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Victoria. What?" "I'm simply being realistic about the timeline we're working with." Victoria turned back to me. "Tell me about your work experience, Sarah. What have you been doing with your life?" "I'm a social worker specializing in child welfare cases." "How quaint." Victoria's tone dripped condescension. "And your educational background?" "Master's degree in social work from Columbia." "Columbia." Victoria nodded approvingly. "At least Eleanor's charity cases have good taste in universities." The insult hung in the air like smoke. I could see Eleanor's hands clenching on the table, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I've spent the last 4 years helping children who've been abandoned, abused, or neglected find safe homes," I said evenly. "It's taught me a lot about reading people, about understanding what motivates them, and about recognizing when someone is trying to manipulate me." The last comment was aimed directly at Victoria, and from her sharp smile, she knew it. "How delightfully naive," she said. "You think your little social work experience has prepared you for corporate warfare?" "I think it's prepared me to recognize bullies," I replied. "And to understand that the people with the most bluster are usually the most insecure." A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably, but Victoria's smile widened. "Oh, I like her, Eleanor. She has spirit. It's going to make crushing her so much more enjoyable." "That's enough," Eleanor snapped. "Victoria, you're out of line." "Am I?" "This girl shows up claiming to be your long-lost daughter, and we're supposed to simply hand over control of the company to her? She has no experience, no understanding of our business, no concept of what it takes to run an empire like this." "She has something you've never had," Eleanor shot back. "A moral compass." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I could see the other board members looking back and forth between the sisters like spectators at a tennis match, unsure whether to intervene or simply enjoy the show. "Perhaps," said an older man I remembered being introduced as the CFO, "we should discuss the transition timeline in more detail." Eleanor nodded, visibly collecting herself. "Of course. James, would you present the succession plan?" For the next hour, I listened as they outlined a complex scheme for transferring power gradually over the coming months. I would start by observing board meetings and key executive sessions. Then I'd begin taking on small responsibilities, reviewing project proposals, attending client meetings, representing the company at industry conferences. By the time Eleanor died, I would theoretically be ready to step into her role as majority shareholder. "It's ambitious," admitted Sarah Chen, the head of human resources, whose shared first name with mine created a moment of confusion when Eleanor called on her. "But not impossible, assuming Sarah, our Sarah, is committed to intensive preparation." "What about the other shareholders?" I asked. "Don't they get a vote in any of this?" "The Blackwood family controls 51% of the company," Eleanor explained. "My 41% plus Victoria's 10%. When I die, you'll inherit my shares, giving you controlling interest." "Unless she predeceases you," Victoria said sweetly. "Or unless she's deemed incompetent to inherit. There are provisions for that in the corporate charter." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of provisions?" "If the inheriting party is found to be mentally unstable, addicted to controlled substances, or otherwise unfit to manage corporate responsibilities, the shares transfer to the next eligible family member," Victoria explained with obvious satisfaction. "In this case, that would be me." "Victoria," Eleanor's voice carried a warning. "I'm simply explaining the safeguards our father put in place to protect the company, Eleanor. Surely Sarah deserves to understand the full scope of what she's inheriting." But I was beginning to understand something else entirely. Victoria wasn't just hostile to my presence, she was actively planning to prevent my inheritance. The question was how far she was willing to go. I think that's enough for today, Eleanor said, standing with careful dignity. Sarah needs time to process everything we've discussed. As the board members filed out, Victoria lingered behind. When we were alone, she approached me with predatory grace. A word of advice, dear, she said softly. This world isn't like your little social work office. Here, weakness is blood in the water, and the sharks are always circling. Eleanor may have convinced herself that you're some kind of corporate savior, but I know better. You're a small-town girl who's in way over her head, and it's only a matter of time before you drown. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. I've been waiting 30 years for Eleanor to make a mistake big enough to cost her the company. Bringing you into this world? That's the mistake I've been waiting for. She walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the boardroom with the weight of her threats pressing down on my shoulders. Eleanor returned a few minutes later, looking exhausted. I'm sorry about Victoria. She's always been difficult. Difficult? I turned to face her. She just threatened me. Victoria threatens everyone. It's her way of establishing dominance. But she's all bark and no bite. Are you sure about that? Eleanor hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw my answer. Victoria Blackwood Hartley was dangerous, and Eleanor knew it. Come on, Eleanor said finally. Let me show you your office. The corner office on the 68th floor was breathtaking, panoramic. Views of the city, elegant furnishings, a desk that probably cost more than I'd made in the past year. A nameplate sat in the center of the desk, Sarah C. Blackwood, Executive Vice President. Executive Vice President? I stared at the nameplate. Isn't that moving a little fast? It's a largely ceremonial title for now, Eleanor explained. But it gives you the authority to attend meetings and access company information. Think of it as your learning permit. I walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, Connor was probably in court representing clients who couldn't afford fancy lawyers. Somewhere out there, my adoptive parents were worried sick about me. Somewhere out there was the life I'd known for 25 years, simple, honest, and safe. Second thoughts? Eleanor asked gently. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. Eleanor, what if I can't do this? What if I'm not smart enough or strong enough or ruthless enough for this world? Then you'll learn to be. Eleanor joined me at the window. Do you know what your first corporate lesson should be? What? Never let them see you doubt yourself. In this business, confidence is currency, and uncertainty is bankruptcy. Even fake confidence? Especially fake confidence. Half of corporate success is convincing people you belong somewhere until you actually do belong there. My phone buzzed. With a text from Connor, how's the first day going? Missing you. I typed back, surviving. Victoria Blackwood Hartley wants to destroy me. His response was immediate, then don't let her. You're stronger than you think. But as I looked out at the Manhattan skyline, I wondered if strength would be enough. Victoria had been playing corporate games since before I was born. She had allies, resources, and 30 years of resentment fueling her ambition. I had good intentions and 8 months to learn how to fight a war I'd never wanted to join. Eleanor's phone rang, and she stepped away to take the call. I could hear her voice becoming increasingly agitated, though she kept it low enough that I couldn't make out the words. What is it? I asked when she hung up. Eleanor's face was pale. That was my doctor. The latest tests show the cancer is progressing faster than expected. What does that mean? It means we might not have 8 months, Sarah. It means we might have 4. For months to learn a business that had taken Eleanor decades to master. For months to prepare for a battle with Victoria that I wasn't equipped to fight. For months to decide if I was willing to sacrifice everything I'd known for a legacy I'd never asked for. I turned back to the window, watching the ant-like people moving through the streets below. Each of those people had their own problems. Their own struggles, their own simple lives that didn't involve billion-dollar inheritances or dying mothers or corporate warfare. I envied every single one of them. There's something else, Eleanor said quietly. I braced myself for another revelation, another complication in an already impossible situation. Someone's been asking questions about you. Private investigators, making inquiries about your marriage, your work history, your financial situation. Victoria? Most likely. She's looking for leverage, something she can use to prove you're unfit to inherit. And if she finds something? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then we deal with it when the time comes. But I could see in her eyes that she was worried. And if Eleanor Blackwood was worried, then I should be terrified. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across my new office, I made myself a promise. Victoria Blackwood Hartley wanted a war? She could have one. But she was about to learn that the small-town social worker she was so eager to dismiss had spent years fighting for children who couldn't fight for themselves. And if there was one thing I'd learned in that work, it was that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones who have nothing left to lose. I picked up the nameplate from my desk, running my fingers over the engraved letters. Sarah C. Blackwood, for better or worse, that was who I was now. And it was time to start acting like it. 3 weeks into my corporate education, I discovered that Victoria Blackwood Hartley wasn't content to wait for Eleanor's death to make her move. She was actively sabotaging my integration into the company, and she was getting help from someone I'd trusted. The revelation came during what should have been a routine client dinner at Le Bernardin. Eleanor had insisted I attend to meet Jonathan Pierce, CEO of Pierce Technologies, one of Blackwood Industries' most important partners. What I hadn't expected was to walk into the restaurant and see Connor sitting at Victoria's table, deep in animated conversation. Sarah. Eleanor's grip on my arm tightened as she noticed my shock. What is it? I couldn't speak. Couldn't process what I was seeing. My husband, the man who had promised to support me through this transition, was sharing wine and what looked like intimate conversation with the woman who had threatened to destroy me. Is that Connor? Eleanor followed my gaze, her voice sharp. With alarm, before I could answer, Victoria looked up and saw us. Her smile was triumphant as she raised her wine glass in a mock toast. Connor turned, and I watched his face cycle through surprise, guilt, and something that looked disturbingly like relief. Well, Eleanor said quietly, this is an interesting development. Jonathan Pierce, a silver-haired man in his 60s, approached us with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to moving in wealthy circles. Eleanor. So good to see you. And you must be the famous Sarah I've been hearing so much about. I forced myself to focus on business, extending my hand with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Mr. Pierce. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Please, call me Jonathan. Any daughter of Eleanor's is family to us. His warmth seemed genuine, but I could see his eyes flickering toward Victoria's table with curiosity. As we were seated at our reserved table, I tried to concentrate on Jonathan's explanation of the partnership between our companies. Pierce Technologies handled cybersecurity for Blackwood Industries' global operations, a relationship worth approximately $50 million annually. But my attention kept drifting to Connor and Victoria, their heads bent together in conversation that looked far too familiar. Sarah? Jonathan's voice brought me back to the present. I was asking about your background in technology management. I'm sorry, I said, forcing myself to focus. I'm still learning about our technology partnerships. Perhaps you could explain what specific services Pierce Technologies provides for us. For the next hour, I managed to maintain professional composure while Jonathan outlined their security protocols, data protection services, and emerging threats in corporate cybersecurity. But underneath my calm exterior, my mind was racing with questions about what Connor was doing with Victoria. Finally, as dessert was being served, Victoria and Connor stood to leave. Connor approached our table while Victoria waited by the restaurant's entrance, watching us with that same predatory smile. Maya, Connor said, and I noticed he used my adoptive name rather than Sarah. I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly. My voice was colder than I'd intended. What are you doing here, Connor? Having dinner. Victoria reached out to me last week. She wanted to meet, to understand my perspective on everything that's been happening. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. With deliberate precision. How thoughtful of her. Connor's jaw tightened at her tone. She's your sister, Eleanor. She's concerned about the family business and about Maya's, Sarah's, welfare. Is she? I asked. Because 3 weeks ago, she threatened to destroy me. She told me about that. She says it was a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to prepare you for how difficult this transition would be. I stared at my husband, wondering when he'd become so naive. Or if he'd always been this way and I'd simply never noticed. Connor, I said carefully, what exactly did you and Victoria discuss? He glanced around the restaurant, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Maybe we should talk about this privately. Maybe we should talk about it now. Jonathan Pierce cleared his throat. Perhaps I should stay, Eleanor interrupted. Jonathan's practically family, and he should understand the dynamics he's dealing with. Connor sat down reluctantly. Victoria is worried that you're being manipulated, Maya. That Eleanor is using your guilt and curiosity about your birth family to pressure you into a role you're not prepared for. And what do you think? I asked. I think you've changed since you came here. You're different. Harder. More suspicious. Less like the woman I married. His words hit me like a physical blow. I'm trying to learn a business worth $3 billion while my birth mother dies of cancer and her sister plots against me. I'm sorry if that's made me less fun to be around. That's exactly what I mean, Connor said, his voice rising slightly. 3 months ago, you would never have talked like that. You would never have been so calculating. 3 months ago, I was Maya Chen, social worker from Connecticut. Now I'm Sarah Blackwood, heiress to a corporate empire. Of course I'm different. But which one is really you? The question hung in the air like an accusation. I looked at this man I'd married, this man who was supposed to love me unconditionally, and realized he was asking me to choose between my past and my future, between who I'd been and who I was becoming. Victoria's right about one thing, Connor continued. This world is changing you, and not for the better. Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. What else did Victoria tell you, Connor? She told me that Sarah's been having emotional problems. Anxiety. Attacks, mood swings, erratic behavior. She's concerned about Sarah's mental health. I felt the blood drain from my face. The succession documents Victoria had mentioned included provisions about mental competency. If she could prove I was psychologically unstable, she could challenge my inheritance. She's documenting everything, Connor continued, oblivious to the trap he was walking into. She wants to help Sarah get the treatment she needs. What kind of documentation? Eleanor's voice could have cut glass. Medical reports, witness statements, evidence of erratic decision-making. Victoria has connections with some of the best psychiatrists in the city. She thinks Sarah should be evaluated. I stared at my husband, finally understanding the full scope of Victoria's manipulation. She hadn't just turned Connor against me, she'd turned him into a weapon. Connor, I said slowly, do you understand what you're saying? I'm saying I'm worried about you. I'm saying I think you need help. You're saying I'm mentally incompetent. I'm saying you're not yourself anymore. Jonathan Pierce looked deeply uncomfortable. Perhaps I should give you some privacy, no. I interrupted. Stay. I want a witness to this conversation. I turned back to Connor. How long have you been talking to Victoria? About 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, she's convinced you that I'm having a mental breakdown. She didn't have to convince me of anything. I can see it for myself. You're paranoid, suspicious, aggressive. You snap at people for no reason. You've abandoned your real life to chase after money and power. I've been trying to learn about my heritage while dealing with a terminal diagnosis for a mother I barely know. If that's made me stressed, I think it's understandable. Is it understandable that you've been taking sleeping pills? Connor asked quietly. I felt the world tilt. What? Victoria told me. She found the prescription bottles in your purse when you were in the boardroom last week. Eleanor's face had gone white. What prescription bottles? Ambien, Xanax, some antidepressant I can't pronounce. She's worried Sarah might be developing an addiction. I stared at him, finally understanding the full depth of Victoria's strategy. Connor, I don't take any of those medications. I've never taken any of those medications. Victoria has photos of the bottles. Your name on the prescription labels. Because she planted them. The realization hit me like lightning. She planted prescription bottles in my purse and then discovered them. She's setting me up. Connor's expression shifted from concern to doubt. Maya, that sounds paranoid? Delusional? Exactly the kind of thing someone with mental health problems would say. Eleanor stood abruptly. Jonathan, I'm sorry, but we need to cut this evening short. Of course, he said, already signaling for the check. Eleanor, if there's anything I can do, actually, there is. Eleanor's voice was grim. I may need character witnesses in the near future. People who can testify to Sarah's competence and stability. As we left the restaurant, I could see Victoria waiting by the valet stand, still wearing that triumphant smile. She'd orchestrated this entire evening, the dinner invitation, Connor's presence, the public confrontation. She was building a case against me, and she was using my own husband to do it. Connor, I said as we reached the sidewalk, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Victoria is not trying to help me. She's trying to destroy me so she can inherit the company when Eleanor dies. That's exactly what someone with paranoid delusions would say, Connor replied. I felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, but my faith in the man I thought I knew. Then I guess we're done here, I said quietly. Maya, my name is Sarah. And apparently, you never really knew me anyway. I turned and walked toward Eleanor's waiting car, leaving my husband standing on the sidewalk with the woman who was systematically destroying my life. I in the car, Eleanor was silent for several blocks. Finally, she spoke. We need to accelerate. Your training. Victoria's moving faster than I expected. What do you mean? She's not just planning to challenge your inheritance after I die. She's planning to have you declared incompetent before I die, so I can't transfer the shares to you while I'm still alive. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the trap closing around me. How long do we have? Based on Connor's testimony. Tonight? Maybe 2 weeks before she files for a competency hearing. Can she do that? She can try. Corporate succession law is complex, but with the right evidence and the right judge, yes. She could potentially have you declared unfit to inherit. We rode in silence for the rest of the trip, but my mind was racing. Victoria had played this perfectly. She'd isolated me from my support system, created evidence of mental instability, and turned my own husband into a witness against me. In 2 weeks, she could destroy everything Eleanor had worked for and leave me with nothing. Back at the penthouse, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably celebrating her latest victory. Somewhere out there, Connor was probably convincing himself he was doing the right thing. Eleanor joined me at the window. There's something I need to tell you, Sarah. Something I should have told you weeks ago. I braced myself for another revelation. Another complication in an already impossible situation. Victoria didn't just want David dead 22 years ago. She arranged it. I turned to stare at her. What? Victoria was the one who had David's brakes cut. She was the one who made sure he died in that car accident. Why are you telling me this now? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Because if she's willing to kill for control of this company, she won't hesitate to do it again. And you, my dear daughter, are now standing directly in her way. The wine glass slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Like my remaining illusions about family loyalty and corporate ethics, Victoria Blackwood-Hartley wasn't just trying to destroy my reputation or my marriage, she was planning to destroy me, and I was running out of time to stop her. The competency hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. Victoria had moved with lightning speed, filing her petition with a judge who had apparently owed the Blackwood family favors for decades. As I sat in Eleanor's study on Wednesday night, surrounded by legal documents and character witness statements, I knew I was fighting a battle I couldn't win through conventional means. The medical testimony will be devastating, Eleanor's lawyer, Marcus Rothwell, said grimly. He was a thin, precise man who had handled Blackwood legal affairs for 30 years. Victoria has 3 psychiatrists willing to testify that the prescription bottles found in your possession indicate serious mental health issues. Based on planted evidence, I protested. Which we can't prove. And Connor's testimony about your erratic behavior will corroborate their professional opinions. Eleanor looked frilier than ever, the chemotherapy and stress taking their toll. What are our options, Marcus? Limited. We have character witnesses, but they all knew Sarah as Maya Chen. Victoria's legal team will argue that the identity confusion itself is evidence of psychological instability. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline one last time as Sarah Catherine Blackwood. Tomorrow, I would either emerge from that courtroom as the heir to a billion-dollar empire, or I would be declared mentally incompetent and stripped of everything Eleanor had tried to give me. There is one option, I said quietly. Both Eleanor and Marcus looked at me expectantly. We give Victoria exactly what she wants. Sarah, what are you talking about? Eleanor's voice was sharp with alarm. I turned from the window, my mind crystal clear for the first time in weeks. Victoria wants to destroy me in court tomorrow. She wants to humiliate me publicly and prove I'm unfit to inherit. What if we let her? Have you lost your mind? Eleanor struggled to her feet. No. For the first time since this whole thing started, I know exactly what I'm doing. I moved to Eleanor's desk and pulled out a legal pad. Marcus, what happens if I voluntarily relinquish my claim to the inheritance? It would revert to the next eligible family member. Victoria. And what if I do that publicly, in court tomorrow? Before Victoria has a chance to present her case? Marcus frowned. It would make her petition moot. But Sarah, you'd be giving up billions of dollars. Would I? I smiled, remembering my years of social work, of helping children navigate impossible situations by finding creative solutions. Marcus, I need you to draft some documents for me. Very specific documents. For the next 3 hours, we worked through the details of my plan. It was risky, probably illegal in several ways, and depended on Victoria's arrogance and greed blinding her to what was really happening. But it was also the only way to protect Eleanor's legacy and ensure that Victoria never got her hands on Blackwood Industries. This is insane, Eleanor said when I finished explaining. You're gambling everything on the assumption that Victoria won't see through your strategy. Victoria has spent 30 years believing she's smarter than everyone else. She won't expect me to outmaneuver her because she genuinely believes I'm a naive social worker who's in over her head. What if you're wrong? Then we're no worse off than we are now. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those pale green eyes that were so similar to Victoria's but held warmth instead of calculation. You know, she said finally, you remind me of your grandmother. She was a brilliant strategist who always preferred the unexpected move. Is that a yes? Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. That's a yes. Let's burn Victoria's world down. The courtroom was packed with reporters, board members, and curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle of a billionaire family destroying itself in public. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table with her team of expensive lawyers, wearing a black suit that made her look like she was already in mourning for my competency. Connor was seated in the witness section, avoiding my eyes. I wondered if he had any idea what Victoria had really done to orchestrate this moment, or if he genuinely believed he was helping me by supporting her petition. Judge Patricia Hawkins called the court to order at precisely 9 o'clock. She was a stern woman in her 60s who had a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings and little patience for wealthy families airing their dirty laundry in her courtroom. This is a petition for competency determination regarding Sarah Catherine Blackwood, Judge Hawkins announced. Ms. Blackwood Hartley, you may present your opening statement. Victoria stood with practiced grace, commanding the room's attention. Your Honor, we are here today because my niece, Sarah Blackwood, is suffering from serious mental health issues that make her unfit to inherit control of a $3 billion corporation. The evidence will show that she has been exhibiting erratic behavior, substance abuse, and psychological instability that pose a danger not only to herself but to the 50,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on responsible corporate leadership. She was good, I had to admit. Her tone was concerned rather than accusatory, painting herself as a loving aunt worried about her troubled niece rather than a predator circling wounded prey. The respondent has shown signs of paranoid delusions, claiming that family members are conspiring against her. She has been found in possession of multiple controlled substances prescribed under questionable circumstances. And according to her own husband, she has undergone a dramatic personality change that suggests serious psychological disturbance. Victoria paused, letting her words sink in before delivering what she clearly thought was her killing blow. Your Honor, Sarah Catherine Blackwood is not the stable, competent individual she pretends to be. She is a deeply troubled woman who needs medical help, not billion-dollar responsibilities. Judge Hawkins nodded. Thank you, Ms. Blackwood Hartley. Ms. Blackwood, would you like to present an opening statement? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. This was the moment everything depended on. Your Honor, my aunt is absolutely right. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Victoria's confident expression flickered with confusion. Even Eleanor, who knew what I was planning, looked momentarily alarmed. I am not competent to inherit control of Blackwood Industries, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the room. I am a social worker from Connecticut who has been thrust into a world I don't understand, dealing with pressures I'm not equipped to handle. My Aunt Victoria is correct, I am not the person who should be running a $3 billion corporation. Victoria's lawyers were whispering furiously at their table, clearly thrown by my unexpected capitulation. But Victoria herself was beginning to smile, thinking she had won more easily than she dared hope. Therefore, I continued, I am here today to formally and voluntarily relinquish any claim to the Blackwood Industries inheritance. The judge leaned forward. Miss Blackwood, do you understand what you're saying? I do, Your Honor. I am voluntarily giving up my inheritance and transferring all claims to my aunt, Victoria Blackwood Hartley. Victoria's smile was triumphant. She had gotten everything she wanted without having to present her fabricated evidence or risk exposure of her more ruthless tactics. However, I continued, and Victoria's smile began to fade, I have one condition. Miss Blackwood, Judge Hawkins said, this is not a negotiation. You cannot place conditions on a voluntary relinquishment. I understand, Your Honor. I'm not placing conditions on the relinquishment. I'm announcing the terms of a separate transaction that took place last night. I nodded to Marcus, who stood and approached the bench with a thick folder of documents. Last night, I exercised my right as Sarah Catherine Blackwood to access my trust fund, which became available when I turned 26 last month. I used those funds to purchase the outstanding shares of Blackwood Industries held by minority shareholders. Victoria shot to her feet. That's impossible. Is it? I smiled at her. Your Honor, the documents will show that as of midnight last night, I personally own 39% of Blackwood Industries stock, purchased at market rates with my own funds. Marcus handed the judge the proof of purchase documents while Victoria's lawyers scrambled through their papers, trying to understand what had happened. When I relinquish my inheritance claim today, I continued, Victoria will indeed inherit Eleanor's 41% stake in the company. However, combined with my 39% and her existing 10%, she will control only 51% of Blackwood Industries. That's still controlling interest, Victoria snapped. It is. But here's where it gets interesting. I turned to face her directly. Victoria, you've spent the last month documenting my supposed mental instability. You have medical testimony, witness statements, and evidence of erratic behavior. All of that evidence is now part of the public record of this hearing. Victoria's face was beginning to pale as she started to understand. The problem is, Victoria, that evidence doesn't just disappear when I relinquish my inheritance claim. It remains as a matter of public record that Sarah Catherine Blackwood, who now owns 39% of your company, has been declared by you and your experts to be mentally unstable, paranoid, and potentially dangerous. Judge Hawkins was following my logic with obvious interest. Continue, Ms. Blackwood. Under corporate governance laws, any shareholder owning more than 30% of a company can petition for the removal of board members or executives who pose a threat to corporate stability. And thanks to Victoria's own legal filing, there is now documented evidence that I pose exactly such a threat. Victoria's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she brushed him away, her eyes locked on mine with growing horror. So here's what happens next, I said, addressing the entire courtroom now. Victoria gets the company she's wanted for 30 years. But she gets it with a major shareholder who has been legally documented as unstable and unpredictable. I can call shareholder meetings whenever I want. I can demand audits of company finances. I can question every decision, every expenditure, every strategic move. I paused, letting the implications sink in. And if Victoria ever tries to have me removed or declared incompetent again, I can point to this very hearing as evidence that she systematically fabricated medical evidence, manipulated witnesses, and orchestrated a conspiracy to steal an inheritance. Which, as it happens, is several different types of felony. The courtroom was dead silent. Victoria's triumphant expression had transformed into something approaching panic. The choice is yours, Victoria, I said quietly. You can accept your 41% inheritance and spend the rest of your life dealing with an unstable major shareholder who will question your every move. Or you can drop this petition and negotiate a reasonable arrangement with a competent businesswoman who just wants to honor her mother's legacy. Judge Hawkins looked from me to Victoria to Eleanor, who was smiling with obvious pride. Ms. Blackwood Hartley, the judge said, would you like to withdraw your petition? Victoria stood frozen for a long moment, her face cycling through rage, admiration, and defeat. Finally, she spoke. I withdraw the petition, Your Honor. Very well. This hearing is dismissed. As the courtroom erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions and spectators trying to understand what had just happened, I walked over to where Connor was sitting. Maya, he started, but I held up a hand. My name is Sarah, I said quietly. And you chose the wrong side. I turned and walked toward Eleanor, who was waiting by the courtroom doors with tears in her eyes. How did you know it would work, she asked as we left the courthouse together. I didn't. But I learned something important in the last few weeks. What's that? Sometimes the best way to win a game is to change the rules while everyone else is still playing by the old ones. 6 months later, Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning in spring, surrounded by the people who had genuinely loved her. The funeral was attended by hundreds of employees, board members, and industry leaders who had respected her vision and integrity. Victoria and I had reached a détente of sorts. She ran the day-to-day operations of Blackwood Industries while I focused on the company's charitable initiatives and ethical oversight. It wasn't friendship, but it was functional. And every day, I could see in her eyes that she remembered how thoroughly I had outmaneuvered her. Connor and I divorced amicably. He'd realized, too late, that he'd been manipulated by Victoria, but the damage to our trust was irreparable. He moved back to Connecticut, and I heard he was dating one of his law firm colleagues. I hoped she was smarter than I'd been about reading people's true character. I kept the penthouse but also bought a small house in the village where I could escape the corporate world when I needed to remember who I'd been before all of this started. Maya Chen and Sarah Blackwood had finally found a way to coexist. The trust fund money I'd used to buy the minority shares had been repaid through dividends within 3 months. Blackwood Industries was thriving under shared leadership, and the employees seemed to appreciate having executives who actually cared about their welfare rather than just quarterly profits. My adoptive parents visited regularly, proud of how I'd navigated an impossible situation while maintaining my integrity. They'd gotten their daughter back, even if she now happened to be a billionaire, and sometimes, late at night in my penthouse office, I would look out at the city lights and think about the woman who had watched me for months before revealing herself at my wedding. Eleanor Blackwood had given me more than money or corporate power. She'd given me the opportunity to discover who I really was when everything I thought I knew about myself was stripped away. I was Sarah Catherine Blackwood, daughter of Eleanor, heir to an empire built on innovation and integrity. I was also Maya Chen, social worker from Connecticut, who had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption and cruelty was simply refusing to be corrupted yourself, and I was exactly who I was supposed to be. The woman who had watched was gone, but her legacy lived on in every decision I made, every employee I protected, and every time I chose courage over comfort. Some stories end with revenge, this one ended with redemption. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.